Well, the Republican state chairman is in the House, J.R. Romano from Derby.
Hopefully it won't be like Republican debates and be 8 hours long.
That many candidates, it's hard.
I thought I was going to die in that room.
I know.
The Naugatuck Valley, a Republican bastion these days.
It is.
Right.
Feminist, myself, George Logan, who's amazing. Love George.
So when you look at this session, and you look at the closeness in the Senate and the closeness in the House, how are Republicans politically looking at this session of the legislature?
Well, there's no question that whatever's determined here in the next few months is going to have a direct impact on the election. So you're going to see some open seats, obviously, with Art Linares running for higher office, Melissa Jevron's moving into the Senate, that House seat's available. So there's going to be some moving parts. But what people are worried about at home is taxes going up, what's happening to our state, and they're very engaged. I mean, they're very, very engaged, and they're watching closely to what's going to happen in this building.
Is it an anti-Trump election or an anti-Malloy election?
I actually think it's an election more about families, right? So into the state of Connecticut, they're watching taxes go up. The economy's been struggling in the last few years, and it's more about what's happening in their own home than what's happening in D.C. Even what's happening in Hartford, they can see it with their own eyes, and I think that's what they're going to take to the ballot box. As much as Democrats want to talk about Trump, the truth is that taxes are on the rise. The cost of living is on the rise here, and wages aren't rising here.
I think Roy probably wants a piece of this.
I got a question about politics. Convention's coming up in May.
Yes.
Bunch of open seats. Your party's got like 30 people running. My party's got like 30 people running. Like, how do you see the conventions playing out?
So it's funny. We're actually looking at the rules historically and how we're going to set up each convention based on the fact there's so many. Are we going to drop the final two? Are we going to put a 15% threshold? So if you don't have 15% after the first vote, you're out. We're still trying to work out those details because there's so many candidates, and there's a lot of people that I get calls from every day demanding one thing or the other. So we'll see how that goes.
One time I really don't envy your job. I think we should have a punt, pass, and kick competition on the Republican side.
Rock, paper, scissors.
So what does JR? Oh, I'm sorry.
Or maybe what they do like in Miss Universe. We could have that kind of thing.
So how
we
do
need
you
some
think...
way to think.
You have a question?
Do you think it would be a good idea? And I'm not saying you're the one, but at some point, if you need roughly 180 delegates on the Republican side to get 15%, which gets you an automatic ballot, would it not be? And I'd be more than happy to join any prominent Republican to encourage anyone running, if you're not even close to that number, if you're not even halfway to that number, you need to seriously think about folding the tent before you get to the convention, because as you know, 13 people, it's unprecedented.
The problem is you can circumvent the process by going out and collecting signatures. And so, for the folks that have hit the threshold of the financing, and or if you're self-funding or raising money, they don't need the convention system. They can go out and collect signatures, which, by the way, you did.
I'm the only one that's ever accomplished it.
So now, that being said, the threshold was much lower.
It's higher for me. It's lower now.
Is it really?
So Ral's gubernatorial.
Oh, that's right.
My threshold was around 12,000. It's 9,000.
It's 9,400, but with the 25% kick out, you need to pull in like 15,000 signatures.
It's worse than absentee ballots, right?
It's terrible, yeah.
And it's actually
having people actually vote.
So I think, Liz, you're 100% right. I think for the two quote-unquote self-funders, it's a little bit more or easier to do the petition drive because it actually costs a significant amount of money to do.
Yeah, you're looking at like $200 a signature.
Yeah. So with in terms of
you got any Democrats who want to do that? I mean, it's $200 a signature.
I think with the convention side of things, I agree with you, Chris. I think people have to get honest with themselves. They see the fact that they are close to having the grant, and so they're going to roll the dice. It muddies up the works, but they're taking the chance because CEP is kind of This
is what happens when the state sets the market for elections.
Well,
when the state's going to cut you a check for $1.5 million and then foot the bill for your general election, why not?
Yeah, so I got a question for you. So a candidate comes to you and says, "We're thinking of running for statewide office. Should I self-fund or should I do public financing?" What do you tell them?
Well, look, I'm a big believer in when I ran for office, I had to raise money the old-fashioned way. So when you raise money the old-fashioned way, it really says that you have support, right? People are buying into what you're selling. They're buying into what you believe in your policies.
Literally.
Literally buying you.
Well, no, that's not necessarily true.
No,
I get that, but look, at the end of the day, when you're talking about the idea of buying influence, it's not as though public financing has gotten rid of dark money. It's not as though you still have millions of dollars. I mean, in fact, it's gotten worse. Well, listen,
Zing!
at the end of the day, it hasn't accomplished its goal. It's just actually made it worse. Because the money is still out there.
So with all these candidates running and a bunch of them trying to qualify for public financing, isn't there a real question as to whether or not there'll be enough money in the budget?
There is.
To hand out to all these different people?
It's going to cost like $20 million just to have primaries.
So are you going to get the cutoff who you don't want to get public finance?
I mean, listen, that's pretty funny. Just meeting
share
with the Secretary of State and be like,
Yeah.
no. Look, they're playing within the rules, right? I mean, this is the field that's been set, and the market now is determining what's happening, and you're having a ton of candidates on the Democratic side and the Republican side. I mean, look, Dan Drew is a prime example of what's wrong with the system. If we didn't have CEP, he's not a candidate, right? And you can make the same arguments for some of my candidates.
He's not a candidate anymore either.
That's
well,
right.
no, but the point is
it's so much fun talking about Dan.
But the
So
point
sad
is that, and by the way, let's not forget of what it's created is these consultants who are massively profiting from taxpayer dollars.
Don't be looking at me.
Don't
Don't be looking at me.
Well, no, but there's viable
I've
legitimate.
never taken a CEP candidate money.
Well, but there's viable and legitimate consultants where I would consider you in that group. But then there's other people who just bounce around, who, because they're getting paid, think that they're professional consultants, and they just hop from Senate race to House race, and they're feeding off this
That's
system.
on both sides.
Yeah,
Okay,
no,
so
I agree.
let's ask you, today is the State of the State, the last one for Governor Malloy. Say something nice about Governor Malloy. What do you think
We both
something
did, by
good
the
that
way.
he has done for
He's
the
leaving.
state?
No, I think
He's a hard
ultimately.
worker.
There we go. That's the popular one. That's the
Here's the thing.
popular
I
one.
think, and I truly believe this. I think the governor was dealt a hand. I don't agree with any of the decisions that he's made, but he did try to solve the problem. But ultimately, whether it was fights within his own party, he just wasn't able to accomplish the goal. I think his intent was good, but he didn't deliver on what needed to happen.
Can I ask, so a real political question? So your party has nominated, thankfully, thank God from my perspective, very wealthy self-funders for the last few election cycles for statewide office, for governor and senate. This year you have somebody like Mark Boughton, who's not like that, who's the mayor, but you have a few candidates who are like that. How do you see that playing out?
I don't know. I honestly, the delegates as well as primary voters are probably going to look at that and say we've been bitten once or twice. But I don't believe necessarily self-funding it negates someone from being a candidate. Matt Bevin, who's the governor of Kentucky, was a self-funder. Here's a guy that owns a company in Connecticut. His family owns Bevin Bells. He's a tremendous governor. He's done a tremendous job messaging and communicating to voters. So I don't think necessarily self-funder disqualifies you, but you have to have a message. You have to be able to connect with people. I think that's what people want. They want to know that who they choose and elect cares about them and understands what's happening in their
Like
lives.
Ned Lamont. Your guy.
Not my guy.
Yes.
So let me ask you too. Our poll that came out this week showed that Chris Murphy is the most popular elected official in the state. So how do you feel that Republicans have an avenue to have a narrative?
Popularity measured by how? A favorable or unfavorable, or just knowing who Chris Murphy is? Because there's another poll that
Having a
said
favorable opinion of him versus
49%. There was a poll that came out that Chris Murphy had not 49% favorable.
Her poll said 56%. That's
Yeah.
what
Okay.
she's talking about.
Yeah, so I mean, it's in the same
Well,
ballpark.
compared to Dan Malloy,
Well, I
I'm
mean,
popular.
that's within the margin of error. And he's one of the really left people in the U.S. Senate. So how do you think that if he's so popular in Connecticut, Republicans' narrative can actually play statewide?
Because when they come home, they sound like Republicans. But when they go to Harvard,
I don't think I've ever heard Chris Murphy sound like a
well,
Republican.
when you talk about he's meeting about tax reform and all these things, when you're more interested in resisting than actually doing the work of a senator. For example, Chris Murphy certainly could have sat down with President Trump and negotiated a better SALT deal for our state because we have one of the most burdensome local taxes on average families in Connecticut. But Murphy was more interested in resisting, as well as the federal delegation, instead of actually trying to negotiate. And we know Trump loves to negotiate, right? So.
I know he loves to say that, but you can't really say the SALT issue was Chris Murphy's fault. And
Well, no, but was he in the room to negotiate? He wasn't.
Chamber.
One thing about that, what's interesting about Connecticut voters is that what they showed us in 2016 is that they were going to vote for Donald Trump, Dick Blumenthal, Rosa DeLauro, George Logan, right? I mean,
Correct.
when you look up and down the ticket,
Yeah, but more people voted for Hillary in the state. That's what I'm saying.
Right,
Like, if you look for the largest numbers to win a statewide,
Sure.
you know, when you get to the smaller districts like legislative and rep seats, you can pick up some seats. But how do you play to that large base?
And here's why I'm excited. When you actually break down the state of Connecticut and the Hillary votes versus Trump votes, Trump did very well in the 2nd congressional district,
Right.
which is a district that we need to win the state. Where Trump did not do well was Fairfield County, traditionally Republican territory. So when we're going into a statewide on a state year, all we have to do is make sure that the people in Fairfield County understand the damaging policies that the Democrats have done to this state, and we're going to be all right. Because ultimately, the 2nd congressional district, whether it's legislatively, whether it's federally, are switching side. It's also one of the reasons why Joe Courtney doesn't say a lot of bad things when it comes to the resist
Who are you
movement.
guys
But
running
hang
in
on
the
a second.
second
Why are you guys having and have had for the last few cycles such a hard time recruiting legitimate candidates for Senate and for Congress? Why do you think that is? I mean, there was a time not that
Are
long
you saying
ago.
Dan Carter wasn't a legitimate candidate? Dan Carter's he was a tremendous state rep.
He might be a
He was
nice
an
guy, but he got blown
retired
out.
Air Force.
But you're not competitive in those races. How come?
Part of the reason why, in my view, is because of public financing. Because
Correct.
you have
I would 100%
candidates
agree with that.
gravitating towards getting a check from the state, as opposed to running for Congress and then running for governor. So instead of going and running for Congress and building up a network, I'm telling you, if we had a candidate who could raise money, we could beat Elizabeth Esty.
I agree with
She's
that
very
100%.
vulnerable in the 5th congressional, but we can't do that because I think my view is that this public financing system sets up candidates for this false idea that the state's going to cut
by
them
the way,
a check.
it's no excuse. I guarantee
Right.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
No, no,
That's
I
heard that.
but
I
that's what I'm saying.
guarantee
Is that
you, if
because
we
the
had-
state doesn't cut you a check to go run for Congress, people who could run for Congress are instead choosing to run for lieutenant governor or for governor.
Better deal.
Yeah, because they don't
If
have to
the
go out and
roles
raise
were
the money.
reversed, I
100%.
guarantee it, if the roles are reversed, most campaigns, at least Republican campaigns, are, quote, small dollar campaigns. But if psychologically you go to a base of people, right? And now the limit for most people is $100. So you budget or you think $100. Some guy walks into your house and say, hey, I need $1,000 to run for Congress. You may even have the capacity to give that. But you haven't been giving in that sort of method, and it's a psychology as much as anything.
And not only that, and this is where I'll give Elizabeth Esty and Chris Murphy credit, you have to be willing to take a chance on yourself.
That's right.
And a lot of times Republicans, or I'll say politicians in general, want the sure thing. And so they're unwilling to risk losing a Senate seat, losing a House seat, to go on that challenge, knowing they have to raise $1 million, $2 million.
The most successful politicians in my lifetime, two most, are John Rowland and Chris Murphy. Each of
But
them.
Chris Murphy didn't go to jail. Twice.
You want to. Yeah, okay. You
Wanna
made
go
your
there?
point. I'm just
No, but the
saying-
gubernatorial
but
candidate
we're
that you guys
talking
have
about-
did.
But we're talking about all kidding aside. It's not funny that each of those guys took a risk. Okay, Rowland gave up a House seat in the Assembly to run for Congress. He won. He gave up a safe congressional seat with 20 years of potential.
Rob
ahead of him,
Simmons, too.
and he ran. Chris Murphy gave up his House seat to run for state Senate. Gave up a Senate seat, safe, the House to Senate. So risk takers.
Rob Simmons, too.
Rob Simmons is another one. Okay, I mean, so that's how you get ahead. You don't get ahead by saying, "Oh, this is the time for running." Unless, of course, you're Dick Blumenthal and you just live long enough where we just say, "Okay, take the seat."
But I think
I
the
was wondering when the Dick
CEP's
Blumenthal bashing was going to come in.
Well,
I think
when the
this-
John
You
Rowland
give us
bashing.
enough
When the
time.
John Rowland bashing started, I always said Dick Blumenthal.
2 hours. Eventually, Blumenthal is going to come into the conversation.
Surprised it wasn't earlier.
I just think the CEP gives that false sense to candidates that they're unwilling to take those risks. I mean, even look on the Democrat side. For this governor's seat, you have senators that could have run. You have state House members that could have run. They didn't take on the challenge because it's not a sure thing. It's not something that they want to. Kevin Lembo, it's easier to raise $75,000 and I'll stay as a comptroller.
I actually think some people didn't take that shot because they know what's awaiting the next governor, but that's a different story.
Well, sure, but the point is that you have to take a risk if you're going to.
Chris is 100% right. I worked for a guy a million years ago, Bill Curry, who gave up a safe statewide seat to run for governor where he was the underdog. So I completely agree with that. Aren't that many people around anymore willing to take that shot?
Forgot about Bill.
Yeah, I mean, we're having fun. I'm having fun. I'm having fun doing this. I hope you guys are.
All right, Chair Romano.
Thank you very much, guys.
Right, Chairman.